to our show.
Thank you, sir.
This is the September 12th, 2017 morning work session for the Portland City Council. Today, colleagues, we are talking about major city projects. As Portland continues to grow, the City of Portland's approach to multi-borough projects needs to evolve to meet the expectations of Portlanders. In the absence of a city manager council form of government, our efforts to undertake complex projects spanning multiple parts of our organization often is more cumbersome and inefficient than it otherwise could be. During the final weeks of our budget process in June, we as a council encouraged our Chief Administrative Officer to propose a different approach. After conversations with both council and staffs, today's work session is a review of the work that's been done to craft a 2018 work plan. We expect that today's work session will generate some questions, input, and direction for next steps as we develop a model to work more effectively across bureaus together. I want to both thank my colleagues and acknowledge that without your interest and help in developing a stronger project management approach across our bureau portfolios, we would definitely not be here today. Just that fact that we have an initial proposal and the beginnings of project teams and goals is a big step in the right direction for us. With that, I'll ask Chief Administrative Officer Tom Reinhart to begin our work session. Tom, thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Council. My name is Tom Reinhart. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer, and I'm proud to be here today with many people that have been working hard to develop this plan and this new approach. As the Mayor said, we're here today to take another step in our effort towards building a more disciplined, clear project management structure for multi-bureau efforts. As a growing city, more and more of what we do is interconnected by necessity. Bureau leadership and staff have found ways to get their work done, but we can improve our ability to work across and between bureaus. Many of our organizations of our size have what's called a project management office, or a PMO. We are not yet building a full-fledged PMO, but we do want to take best practices and see if we can apply them to an annual work plan under your direction. So how did we get here today? I want to do a quick recap of that and then explain the agenda, and then we'll be off. Bureau directors and others, via a consultant report and dozens of conversations that I had as I was transitioning into this role, all basically said the same thing to us, and that was, quote, get beyond the convener role. What they meant was OMF has developed a process over the years to convene bureaus to solve problems, but people wanted us to go further and develop a discipline that we could actually bring these projects to fruition. The staff and I took this feedback and worked with colleagues, all of you and your staffs, to write what I called the Major City Projects Memo, which could have used better branding, but that's what it was. And we sent it to you a couple months ago. It outlined the projects that you'll hear more about today. To do this work, we've begun building a team. This team will work on council initiatives, best practices for city management, and process improvements which benefit all of us. Thanks to your support, we were able to expand the existing capacity of policy staff and reorganize some people on my team to build this strategic projects and policy team, some of whom are in the room today. This team will be working on multiple initiatives, but today you'll be hearing about the focus on the large projects that span multiple bureaus and have a high level of complexity. So what are we aiming to accomplish today? Today you will hear about each project that we are proposing beyond the major projects work list. There will be 3 slides for each project. The slides will be of the problem, how we propose to address it, and a description of roles and accountability. We hope you will ask questions and make comments throughout. This is intended to be an open work session. At the end, our goal is to hear from council whether or not we are on the right track, hear suggestions for improvement, and gauge your support for a resolution to commit ourselves to an annual work plan with clear measures of success and an accountability timeline. Any questions on what we're trying to accomplish? Is that a good use of our time today?
Sounds great, colleagues.
Before we get into the projects, I want to do a brief review of how we chose these projects, which is actually in your slide deck, if you want to follow along. So So we received a lot of good ideas from both your offices and our bureau leaders for projects we could take on collectively and track over the next year that address key problems. We took as our baseline the opportunity to increase the city's credibility with Portlanders as we strive to meet higher service expectations for our rapidly growing city. So you'll see the bullet points there. They focus on raising the satisfaction level with services, efforts that cannot be done successfully by one bureau alone. Each project that we considered had to have broad interest among you and your staffs and bureaus. And we had to identify a bureau that actually owned the project and would lead, which has been an issue in the past when we've tackled these difficult efforts. The 5 projects you'll hear about today fit this criteria. 3 of the projects I have been simplistically calling forward-facing, and 2 of them more internal-facing, just so that we could get our heads around them and try to describe how they fit into the city's overall picture. Any questions on the criteria before we go into the presentation?
Just a comment. This is on if it has the greens on? Does it stay on, Carla? Okay. You know, this criteria about raising Portlanders' satisfaction level with local government services, one of the things that I'd ask you to consider is we often have council hearings where particularly the infrastructure bureaus come forward and say, hey, we've just completed a very complex undertaking. We've done it on time and under budget, and the council all says, that's great. And outside of, our loved ones, there's no one out there that actually ever hears that because it's not considered newsworthy. So the question is, in part, I think, because I think people expect that that's the baseline. Yet we think about it as a very big deal, particularly in these really complex things. So if we're going to raise Portlanders' satisfaction level, there's a fundamental question about how we advise them, how we communicate them that tax dollars are being spent wisely, projects are coming in on time and under budget, and what's the mechanism for doing that? The great Dan Levy once told me that elected officials in the modern era are responsible for content and delivery. And I think that's increasingly true in a fragmented social media environment. But anyway, I would ask you to consider on those occasions where, in the private side, there's a dinner, there's a celebration, there's all kinds of things. And in the public side, it's almost like that's what people expect, so it doesn't get the kind of bigger attention.
I agree.
But if the goal is to reassure Portlanders or raise satisfaction level, we have to figure out how we communicate that. Just an observation.
I couldn't agree more, but I know that there's been a lot of conversations on this, Commissioner Udaley. Mayor, do you want to add to that?
Sounds like we need a communications office. Nobody? Okay. They're moving right along.
I do want to...
I'll chime in on, I was refraining because this is a big issue. And I mean, we could talk about it all day
Good.
and not reach an agreement. The reality is satisfaction levels as we currently collect the data and report it are very low. And my personal view, having a good view of both how things are going internally and how things are going externally, is that we don't get everything right, but we actually do really well with the resources and the authority and the mix of resources that we have here. I've often wondered whether we're collecting the right data. I've often wondered how the data we collect around satisfaction and how we define satisfaction fits in with larger trends that we cannot control.
Right.
And so satisfaction to me is sort of a fuzzy criteria. I mean, if you start breaking it down project by project, are you satisfied with this service? Are you satisfied with that service? Are you satisfied with this specific interaction with your government? You might get more concrete data, but if you just ask people, is the city moving in the right direction or is the city moving in the wrong direction, how much of that do we actually control? Right. Versus how much of that is broad economic trends, how much is that has to relate with people's concerns about things that are going on nationally or globally. How much are people actually aware of what goes into a glass of pure drinking water as opposed to a negative story they may have read about one aspect of what goes into this drinking water? And as Commissioner Fish just rightly said, most of us get our news through the news media, and the news media, they have limited resources, they have limited bandwidth, they have to concern themselves with their readership and what their readership wants, will respond to. And reading great stories about how well we're doing delivering a glass of water doesn't sell newspapers. It never has and it never will. And so it's, so for me, I'm a little bit skeptical about the criteria of satisfaction, because I think it's hard to measure it, I think it's hard to move it, and I don't think we don't have span of control over all aspects of satisfaction. So I would just say, with regard to the very specific services we deliver, Nick actually put out what I thought was the best list. Do what we say we're gonna do it on time, and do it under budget. Those things we control.
So Mayor, can I just make one additional comment on that? You know, when a organization in our community is doing a bond measure for whatever purpose, the message that they share with all local government is, please don't do anything stupid during the period of time that we are running our campaign. Why? Because a self-inflicted wound at any level of government ends up creating a kind of a ripple effect. And the truth is, I think to back up something you said earlier, Mayor, about the difference between aggregate impressions and specific impressions, how much of whatever people today feel about right direction, wrong direction is influenced by who's the occupant of the White House, about funding priorities out of Washington, about floods and tornadoes and anxiety and economic uncertainty. Is that us, or is that a bigger picture? What I actually find encouraging is when the auditor does her annual survey and you look at the numbers, and we don't, I think, spend enough time going over those numbers with the auditor. You know, yes, fire and parks end up getting, top of the line numbers as they should. I mean, people are very glad that there's a fire bureau that can get to their home quickly to put out a fire, and people love their parks. But the Water Bureau ends up getting over 2/3 satisfaction. And my view is that that's largely a reflection of people just feeling good about the fact they can turn on the faucet and water comes out. Same way they feel about electricity. They hit the switch. In fact, in our survey work, most people's number one concern is reliability. They want these services to work. And most people, including me, don't quite know how it works, but they want it to work and they want a good value. So one idea that's been kicked around over time is we can't solve all these problems, but I hope we strongly consider coming out with a report card for every one of these major projects. Because I think the way we get credibility is not just singing our praises, but actually having an honest report card that says, A, C, B, C minus, with a commentary saying, this is what we learned, this is what we're gonna do better next time. I think that actually resonates more with people than patting ourselves on the back because we get what, we do what people expect us to do.
I agree with that. Let me give just one more illustrative example of the perils of satisfaction. So this council, 3 weeks ago, voted to spend over a period of many years $500 million to build a water filtration system in the Bull Run. And
Well, it'll be closer to 300 million.
300 million, perfect. See, we've already
going
knocked
down.
$200 million.
You asked us to value engineer it, Mayor.
That is
We are-
highly satisfying.
And by the way, all the neighborhood meetings they've been doing, citizens have said, we're okay with it, but boost the low-income discount program to help people that are impacted.
Perfect.
So we are very
Perfect.
pleased.
But the opposition that existed 3 weeks ago, people wondering whether we should be spending that kind of money for a filtration system in the Bull Run watershed, has eviscerated. It's gone. It's evaporated. And it's evaporated because even though during those work sessions and those hearings, we heard there was a chance of a fire in the Bull Run watershed, we also heard, well, there's mitigating this and there's mitigating that. Well, now people know what a fire in the Bull Run watershed actually looks like. And all of a sudden, I'm not hearing anybody express any dissatisfaction with this council's decision to move forward on a filtration system. So again, we're kind of subject to broader trends that are really beyond our control to some degree. That was not only the right decision to make, and Commissioner Fish, again, I want to thank you for your leadership in pushing that important decision through, and it was the long view, which was also an important decision for us to make as a body. But now people have a very clear and obvious example of why we needed to do what we did. And we don't always have such obvious, stark examples to back the work that we are doing, particularly if what we are doing is a preventative stance.
I like the idea of the report card. We'll follow up. We'll figure out a way to build accountability metrics. I think there is a separate conversation on the story of the city and how we communicate things. And I know that conversation started among council. But I appreciate the report card idea, and we are serious about figuring out the best way to communicate the work in an honest, transparent way, like Commissioner Fish pointed out.
But it's got to be, and again, I'm sorry to harp on this, the report card has to be reporting on things that we actually control.
Right. Agreed. Okay, into the projects. The first one that I'm going to do, because we did a whole work session on it a week ago, 2 weeks ago, on the 29th, is Bill Portland. I'm not going to spend much time on it besides telling council we took your direction and we're putting together a resolution for your consideration. The mayor's office will have it at the end of the week. But if there are open questions on that, I'm happy to take them now, or else we'll just move into the next effort. Okay, good. So my colleague, Director Rebecca Esau, is here, along with Jamie Waltz from my team, who have been working on the permitting, Public Works permitting issue. And I want to just do a brief overview of how this came to pass. As the mayor and Commissioner Daly know, there have been 2 different Gator sessions on permitting as related to affordable housing development. And it spurred a very healthy conversation among bureaus about all the different ways that permitting touches multiple areas and multiple bureaus, how we can get better at that. Looping back to the previous conversation, in my view, it's one of the main ways that we can show Portlanders that we're improving the internal operation by expediting and streamlining what we're doing on permitting as the city grows. And while it might not be the foremost thing on people's minds at barbecues, it is something that people talk about whether or not it's easy to work with the city in terms of development. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Rebecca Esau. Take it away.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for being here. So following up on what Tom was just saying about the Gator process, it highlighted several issues related to permitting in general: the need to improve coordination at the director level, the need for shared goals for service delivery, and the need to resource these functions appropriately to provide timely service. So jumping to I'm sorry, we don't have PowerPoint visible for you, but we'll start with this slide in your slide deck, which is a graphic that's trying to illustrate the problem with permitting. First, it's a complicated system with many bureaus and review groups involved, each charged with administering their own specific regulations and meeting their individual bureau missions. The graphic is overly simplified. Depending on the development proposed, there can be as many as 17 review groups from 6 bureaus involved in permitting, and the bureaus involved are BDS, PBOT, BES, Water, Fire, and Parks. The reviews are done concurrently, but within silos, which the applicant has to navigate. We don't control the volume of work coming into the system or the quality of the applications. That relates to what you were talking about, Mayor, that we don't have control over a lot of the aspects of the process. Well-prepared applications obviously get through the system faster and use less staff time than those that require a lot of corrections and back and forth with the applicant. The staffing capacity of each bureau's review groups, which is illustrated here by the width of the cylinders, is a large part of what determines how fast permits get through the system. Separate but connected to this is the Public Works permitting process. If a Public Works permit is required for the project, the design of that work needs to be at 60% completion before the building permit can be issued. So staffing capacity issues there at PBOT, BES, and Water can also impact the timeliness of building permit issuance. We are only as fast as our slowest review group. I've said that over and over, and we'll continue to say it. What this leads me to is the importance of all participating bureaus continuously monitoring the capacity of their review groups to deliver timely service and a commitment to resource each bureau's review groups with sufficient staff to be able to meet deadlines. So going on to the next slide, we're working on collaboration between bureaus on two levels, the director level and the senior management level. With OMF support, specifically Jamie Waltz is partnering with me, and she's been acting as the facilitator for these new meetings we pulled together. We've established a monthly meeting of bureau directors who have staff involved in the permitting process to collectively engage in a process to improve service delivery. I call this group the Development Directors Group, and we want to create a shared ownership of the permitting process and our service delivery goals. So very quickly, what we're aiming to do is create a charter and have that done by the end of October. Then we'll develop agreed-upon metrics to track service delivery by the end of the calendar year. And we'll identify staffing needs and develop a staffing proposal by spring of 2018.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, you can.
Could you describe for us what you mean by a charter? Sort of give us a simple description and then kind of an example.
So Jamie can jump in here too, but it identifies the roles of all the participants. So we'll get to that on the next slide where it lays out, for example, me as the interim BDS director. I'm the convener, but I'm also a participant. OMF is a supporter and facilitator. It's going to get into what does success look like and how do we measure that? How do we know when we've gotten there? Jump in if you want to.
Sure. The charter is to really just formalize the purpose of this group. What are we coming together each month? What are the goals we want to achieve? And it helps us keep on track so we know the focus and direction. And like Rebecca said, it outlines the roles and responsibilities of who all is expected to participate in these processes.
And so, I'm familiar, for example, with the Oregon Solutions process, which culminates in what's called a Declaration of Cooperation. That is a very specific charter, if you will, which says, among all the participants, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're going to do, and then it's reduced to writing and people sign it. I take it that this is a sort of higher level document, and this charter would apply to all the projects in the pipeline.
Yes, it's setting the framework of how we're going to work together, since this is a new group that hasn't been convened before. And then we'll develop a work plan and take on specific projects.
And can I make one suggestion? And you're probably already a mile ahead of me, but I think one of the frustrations people often have is that when they hit a roadblock, they're not sure who's the person they need to call to be the ombudsman decider. Commissioner Udaley has talked about doing some additional concierge service in her bureau. Well, that's a very clearly defined person you can call. But here we're talking about who does the tiebreaker, who has the authority. We don't want it just automatically going up to the director or the commissioner, because our system just doesn't really work that well if that happens. So we would welcome the opportunity, like in my bureaus, to identify who is the person that can have the first crack at saying, okay, here's how we'll slice it.
Commissioner, I want to speak to that for a minute because soon after I took the job as CAO, the mayor encouraged me to meet with leaders at Intel and Northwest Natural who have project management offices. What was interesting about it for me from a learning perspective is their charters, so the office is agnostic on the projects. They get handed projects from multiple divisions and places that within their organizations that span the complex work they do. And the charter serves as not just the organizational component and the timeline, but exactly what you're describing. Who decides what, so that that's clear and people don't lose weeks in their process, whether they're building a new transmission system or whether they're building a new fab to do research and make new chips for Intel. So the learning that we're trying to go through is, in our system, how do we do this between the various constituencies? We have the council that needs to provide direction on resources and authority. We have directors that do the day-to-day work with their teams. So the charter, as we envision it, outlines all those roles. That if we have clear direction from you on an annual work plan and resource allocation through directors like Director Esau, then the charter can outline what's expected at every level and who makes what call. So it's exactly the way you're describing it.
There's obviously a communication component to that so that we get the word out. here's where you call, here's the portal when you're having trouble navigating something, or you run into a conflict between bureaus.
Yeah, and one of the things that we hear in our bureaus sometimes is a lack of clarity about who is the decision maker, and among the potential decision makers, a lack of clarity that they're going to be backed up when they make a discretionary call. And if this is to work, we have to identify a person or persons that have the authority, and then the leadership needs to say, make your best call. And we're not going to second guess you to death, just, with the goal of getting to yes, obviously, but make your best call.
All right, continuing on, so we'll identify staffing needs and develop a staffing proposal by spring of 2018, and by spring 2019, reach service delivery goals set by this new development directors group. Additionally, we'll develop a work plan for process improvement projects, such as what you were just talking about, and the tools and resources necessary to make that happen. One example is to make more resources and services available online. For example, BDS is planning to digitize historic microfiche records and make them available online. Other examples include reducing wait times in the permit center through a variety of methods, such as providing more customized portals for the different customer groups that we're serving and how they enter the system. So, for example, if you want to submit a permit to build a new house, you shouldn't have to wait in line with everybody else who may have just zoning questions to create a by appointment sort of intake system. In addition to this new group, several bureaus are working concurrently to improve the system. Some recent improvements that have been implemented include continuous improvement of the public works permitting process. BES has made some changes that will save 3 to 5 hours a month for BES staff. And PBOT is going live with an online credit card payment option, which will allow customers who are getting minor improvement permits in the right-of-way, you probably don't know what those are, but that's if you want to get a curb cut in a driveway. Right now, you have to come into the Development Services Center and wait in line and get that permit. We expect that's going to reduce the number of people coming into the permit center by about 3,000 customers annually. And then finally, the last slide just goes over the roles that we are laying out with the charter as to who's doing what with this new development directors group. And we are still in the beginning phases of developing this process. So we're currently laying the foundation of how we're going to be moving forward. We're looking at working with CBO to identify metrics for measuring success. Right now, we're a little bit limited with what we can pull out of the track system, but we hope to be able to pull out more data through the POP system once that goes online. Any questions?
I would just like to comment on the undertaking of digitizing our massive backlog of paper. Jamie and I took the thrilling life of a permit tour and learned that with current staffing, it would take about 27 years to digitize all our records, and that our permitting staff is doing a lot of walking back and forth, back and forth. So we're gonna, I think, be addressing that staffing need soon, and I'm gonna commit right here and now that it will not take us 27 years. I can't tell you how long it will take, but it won't take 27 years.
And in order to do that, we will be using the services of one of those inward-facing 5 projects, procurement, to get a contract to do much of the digitizing work for us.
Director Esau.
That's my
oh,
plug.
Go ahead, Commissioner Fisher.
Question for you. I'm looking at the slide on permitting, and so the participants are PBOT, BES, Water, Parks, and Fire. So Dan has PBOT, I've got the utilities, Dan has Fire, Commissioner Fritz has Parks. So basically, we've picked the big we've picked the big infrastructure bureaus and 2 others. We seem to have given the mayor a pass. So I'm just curious, does the and I ask this not to be flip, but are there not bureaus that have big permitting or infrastructure needs in the mayor's office that would be candidates for this, or is that for a phase 2?
These are the bureaus that are involved in reviewing building permits, the primary bureaus. Are you thinking of another bureau that's not?
You've discovered the mayor's secret for assigning bureaus, Commissioner.
Well, I mean, housing PDC, they don't.
Housing is peripherally involved. I would not call them a major player.
We don't
In
mean that- we
reviewing
don't
building
mean- We don't
permits.
mean that in a disparaging way. We're
In-
just saying that.
In the,
And the Portland
role of
Development, and the
reviewing
Portland
permits.
Development Commission doesn't?
They do not review building permits.
Okay, helpful, thank you.
Director Esau, before you leave, could you, knowing that it's a little bit, it's bordering on hypothetical and a little bit anticipatory, could you talk to council about the way you envision their role as the charters shape up and as this group moves forward? Just so that they're clear on the expectations we will be bringing to them.
Yeah, I should have touched on that. I will need all of your support to help with the bureaus in setting priorities and allocating resources for a lot of the bureaus that we work with. Permitting and development review is just a small fraction of their bureau's staffing, of their resources, and of their focus. So I would appreciate if you could help get this on the radar and make it a priority. It only works if we're all staffing it and prioritizing it appropriately. So thank you.
Thank you. Council, any more questions before we move to the next section? Director Esau, thank you.
Thank you.
The Consolidated Customer Service Team, here they come. Welcome. So, brief intro, as the team's getting settled here. Mayor and council have been interested in quite some time in improving our approach to what is loosely called customer service. We all do it via our bureaus. We all deal in terms of resident requests and dealing with the public in various ways. And over the years, the city has had different attempts at trying to consolidate phone lines, make things more efficient, study a 311 system, look at customer relationship management systems, which are called CRM systems. And this item on our proposed work plan is coming out of the budgetary allocation you made as a council for us to scope potential 311 system and what sequence of events we might need to take to get there. And we have broadened that into a whole look at the way we do customer service across the city. And Jane Brayton and John Dutt are here to walk us through that. So welcome.
Thank you. John's going to start a little bit from the front lines in describing one of the problem areas from his perspective, and then we'll talk about next steps.
Okay, so yes, John Dutt with Office of Neighborhood Involvement, City County Information and Referral Supervisor. I've been doing that for 15 years, so I was asked to kind of bring my perspective in terms of the problem, I guess, and maybe touch a little bit on the solution, and then Jane will go into more detail about what's being proposed to move that forward. I know, well, 3 of our 5 city council members were here in 2014 when we had the Stern Consulting did a business case study report. And I know Mayor's been around with the county chair role and all that, so you're familiar with the whole concept of 311. And I know Chloe's a quick study, and a lot of her staff have been involved in these conversations. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about CRM and 311 unless you have any questions. I mean, I'll touch briefly on some of the high-level benefits of why I think it's so important. But this graphic of the 140-some phones, I think it's a good graphic, but actually when I was looking at it this morning, I was kind of wishing it would also have the dozen or more computer servers or whatever, because I think a lot of people I've talked to over the years think, oh, 311, that's just a phone number that you call, and then, why don't we just activate that phone number and call it good? The problem with that is it's really not about a phone number, it's really about a database, a common citywide CRM, which is a customer relationship management system. So right now we have lots of phone numbers, but we also have lots of different service intake and tracking systems. The bureaus all kind of do their own thing, and some are pretty sophisticated, others are not so much. So what we're really talking about is a customer service / service delivery project to have everybody look at how we're currently delivering services and how can we do that better. One of the things that I tell people is right now we have our 823-4000 line, which is kind of the closest thing we have to 311 type service. You can call us about anything and we'll help you figure out who you need to talk to and all of that. But over 90% of the time, we have to transfer that call somewhere else to actually make their request. And if you talk to other cities that have implemented pretty robust 311 CRM systems, they aim for like 80% one-call resolution. So right now, our service, we're at like 10% maybe. So that's really a simple way to think about it, because right now you can call us and you've got a problem property in your neighborhood with junk cars and tall grass or whatever. Well, we have to connect them to code enforcement to actually do that intake work. Whereas if we had the CRM system, whoever answers that 311 call could actually take all that information, get it in the system. It would automatically route to whichever inspector it needs to go to. They can then do their work, enter it into the system. The person can get some sort of a email automated thing that says, hey, your case has been assigned, the inspector went out, this is what happened. Whereas right now, it's just, they call us back 2 weeks later and say, hey, I made this complaint. What's going on? I haven't heard anything. We don't have any way of knowing that, so then we got to transfer them back over to that service, and then they
So I have
to try to investigate.
3 quick questions.
Yes.
In this chart that has all the black phones, and then the 3 referral numbers, is the point of this graphic that people are calling all those phones first, or that the 3 phones that are highlighted are required to get answers to refer people to those other phones?
Well, I didn't come up with this graphic, but I think the reality is they call all of these numbers, and they certainly call 911 and 3333 more than they need to, which is another one of the big benefits of us pursuing this project, is alleviating some of that burden on BOAC of these calls that come to them that shouldn't come to them. But yeah, they certainly call, as you know, your office or
Right.
the bureau front desks and ask questions that really have nothing to do with that particular bureau.
So I'm going to just make an observation. Recently, I had a little problem I had to clear up with a bank and with a phone company. And by the time I was finished, I felt like my passport had been stamped about 20 different countries. Each time I was put on hold for about 15 minutes. And I guess I had an hour to kill to get something very minor fixed. But it is a function now of how big companies manage this. They outsource it all. So you end up having to speak to lots of people, and you get so far until someone says, gosh, that's not really my bailiwick. I'm going to send you over to India, and then I'm going to send you to Pakistan, and then whatever. And it's a wonderful system if you have an abundance of time to navigate. And then, what happens occasionally is you get disconnected, and it's just infuriating. I have a terrible sinking feeling that as more and more people have that experience dealing with their bank, with their credit card, with whatever, then they deal with government, we end up being judged against whatever the frustration they're feeling. So I personally believe very strongly in the idea of a central portal, and then making it very clear who's accountable. But one other thing I want to share with you, we'll be working with Tom and others this fall on a protocol about how we communicate with the public. Elders in Action has a couple of very strong admonitions for local government. But one of them is the font that we use. We send out a lot of materials to people they can't read, and it's just very disrespectful. And a lot of the people that we're sending it to are over the age of 50. So if it's the wrong font, we're essentially saying we don't care whether you can read this or not. The number one complaint we get from Elders in Action when they review our stuff is we list 10 phone numbers on 3 pages of a thing. And so an 80-year-old woman looking at this flyer, trying to navigate, doesn't know who to call. Because if you say there's 10 numbers, you might as well say there's 100 numbers. What they want is a control number. A number you can call with someone who'll say, Mrs. Smith, I got you, and I'm going to walk you through it. And I think we really all have to embrace that. Having lots of numbers is confusing to older adults. And of course, font and graphics and everything. And so I think we'll be working with Tom to see if we can come with some templates for the citywide. where people just understand how better to communicate with our most important, some of our most important constituents. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, and I think those things that you mentioned, Commissioner Fisher, are exactly what I think have, and that's part of what excites me so much about this idea of CRM and 311 is I think it affords us a lot of opportunities to do those things that are very challenging to do citywide right now. I mean, I think some bureaus do a very good job of that, but it's very inconsistent in terms of, that.
Great.
So as far as other things, I mentioned customer service and service delivery efficiencies. Something that you guys talked about a little bit earlier in terms of customer satisfaction. I think from a very practical level, I think another one of the real benefits of CRM is it gives you really good data on who's calling about what and what's the resolution on different types of requests that I don't think we really have right now. So there's some really good data that can come out of that. I've seen a lot of examples of how cities have used that data to reallocate resources. It's taking us a week to fill a pothole, but a month to fill or fix a streetlight. So let's, reallocate some resources within our maintenance department. Just things like that that are very practical, but very measurable. So I think, the data side of it is really exciting too, to have a centralized source of that data that's consistent and transparent. I've seen a lot of really good things cities have done with putting that data out there for folks to see, okay, this is what's going on, and being able to really measure something versus just anecdotal in terms of this is how much, we're getting a lot of calls about this, so it must be an issue, versus we actually have data to show that that's an issue or something we need to work on and do better. Alluded to a little bit about 911 calls. I mean, that's a lot of cities, well, first of all, another thing that kind of bewilders me sometimes is that, we've had 311 systems in the United States for 20 years now, over 20 years. In the city of Portland, we're always touted as being real technologically advanced or whatever, and we still do a lot of this sort of customer service intake tracking in a very primitive way. So it would be great to kind of move forward and learn from other cities, because we're not making anything up here. This is being done all over the country. But a lot of cities have implemented, especially early on, to take a burden on for their 911 call centers, and that would certainly be one of the benefits of us doing this too, because I know that's an ongoing issue that we're having, and alleviating calls to that group. And then I guess the other thing I was going to mention is emergency preparedness is another real benefit of having a 311 call center, because it can a lot of times function as sort of a backup when there's an emergency. Just one little anecdote that happened last week was we had wildfires. And so emergency management called me and said, hey, could you guys help us take calls to this evacuation line? And I was like, sure. So we did that, but it was a good exercise, because we discovered that we didn't quite have enough capacity to really deal with that volume of calls. And then they ended up partnering with 211 to help with that. But we took like over 600 calls between 8 and 5 just about evacuation. So it worked fairly well. There were some challenges with information sharing and getting things rolling, but it was a good exercise. But to me, it really, again, showed how it'd be great if we had more capacity. If we had a 311 type call center, we could have much more easily integrated that
I
with
get
what
that
we
you were
do,
getting
so.
evacuation calls. Did you get also water quality calls? Did you get any of the calls from people saying, how's the bull run? Is the water impacted?
We had a few, yeah.
Because that's interesting, because how do those get routed? Because we got a handful, and those are the kinds of things that we often send a more detailed response to, because it's a very serious issue. So how do we make sure that is shared?
So I think, the other thing I did want to touch on was in terms of the solution to the problem. Like I said, we've talked about this for at least a decade in different fits and starts, and we had the 2014 report, which I thought was a really good sort of business case study and overall kind of roadmap for how we could approach the project. But then, it's almost 3 years later, nothing's happened since then. And I think in talking to other cities that have done this, consistently, they mention that the biggest challenge, the biggest obstacle isn't the cost, isn't the technology, the, workforce issues, those are all minor things compared to the fact that you really need high-level leadership support, because this is a citywide project. It's not a BOAC project. It's not an ONI project. It's a citywide project. We need all the bureaus to be on board and participate and figure out how to make this thing work. Usually you would do it in a phased approach, start with a couple of departments or bureaus and move it forward, but you need a citywide commitment to it. And like I said, all the cities that I've talked to mentioned that's the biggest challenge, is just you're going to have resistance internally, so change management's really important, and selling it to bureaus and working with them to show them the benefits and how it can integrate with their work to alleviate some of that, frontline
So
work. that they
Tom,
do.
when we go into the legislative season, our crack lobbying team circulates a letter, and it says, no commissioner or mayor shall freelance outside of the city's legislative agenda, and everything will be run through our lobbying team. We sign that letter. It's a binding document that reminds us that we speak with one voice and we don't freelance. I like that letter as just a reminder of city philosophy. There's been no resistance to the council signing on, so I do think that when we go beyond just sort of nudging people at your Gator meetings or your monthly sessions to having commissioners sign documents saying, my bureau's in and we're going to do these things, I think that's your insurance policy. If a commissioner signs on to a declaration or a whatever saying, we're going to play and we're going to go through this pilot, then that should affect behavior down the chain of command, I would think, I would hope.
I look forward to working on a letter with all of you. That's a great idea.
And so the last thing I wanted to say about that was just, the importance of that high-level leadership. And I guess what excites me about OMF and Tom's current approach to, more project management, because I think that's really the only way something like this is going to happen, is to have that sort of leadership. So I'm very excited about this current strategy for moving it forward. So.
I guess just to segue, to talk a little bit about that strategy, John mentioned that one of the things we've seen from other cities is that phased approach. One of the things that we've learned in the city, we have a technology executive steering committee that Tom has led that is really starting to build some momentum and some ownership of an enterprise approach. And they have already been interested in looking at the customer relationship management systems. So the city has a lot of systems that either do part of this or could be added on to do part of it. So we have billing systems that collect a lot of customer data and that we conduct transactions with. We have a lot of notification systems from Salesforce. We have bureaus interested in Gov Delivery. There are alert systems. We have systems that track requests for service or complaints. So Portland Reporter, you can go in and click on the photo of your problem and you don't necessarily have to know what bureau that's being routed to. So we have that system. We also have systems that track our businesses, so business licenses in the city, our vendor information, and then we have our primary phone systems with the 3 telephones that you see there, so dispatch, non-emergency, and city-county INR. So what we have learned from other cities who've begun to implement those is that we should first figure out what are the capabilities that we have or systems that we could add on to. We also have an enterprise resource platform with SAP that does have a CRM component that could be added onto it. We're not saying that that's the right solution. We're just saying we feel like we should do the due diligence and look for, similar to how we've done other projects, what do we have in current capabilities? What could we add to? And then where do we see opportunities? We see a cluster of bureaus who want to do this first and make an immediate impact. So we've got 3 fairly new public safety directors, some of them coming from other cities. That may give us an opportunity to say, what is it that you've done in that city? We've got a Portland building reconstruction project going on with a customer service desk. that is leading to some conversations about, are there some bureaus that want to go in on that? As John mentioned, it's not just phone, it's not just counter, it's email presence. So we've got a group of people that are expecting that they can do transactions with the city via email or a web application, and they can get a notification back. And then we still have some traditional forms of communication we need to make. But those become all part of that wrapper in what do we have now, how could we build on it, and where are the prime opportunity areas. Then our next step would be to convene some bureau stakeholders to be the first people to look at this with them. There may be some functions that, for some reason, it requires a certain threshold to be able to handle that, and it would be tough to actually route people through a system. But we need to be able to hear that and resolve that so that we get some good recommendations. And then we want to assess the level of effort. Is this a high, medium, low? And then what priority do they see this? So that when we map out those phases, we're really loading it up with building on success in each phase. That's part of the project management methodology that we would recommend. We've seen that work before with bureau customers, and they get to have some buy-in along the way. But it's certainly greatly led by the leadership that you're providing, which is, do we have a council commitment that this is something that we want to explore? We certainly got that with the budget direction, and now it's time to dive into the details to bring back a recommendation to you that we think is viable.
Well, I'm obviously an enthusiastic supporter. I'm ready to sign that letter right now. You got it, Tom?
Not yet.
But I would just like to take a moment to recognize John Dutt and his information referral team. As he mentioned, they took on a load of work during the Eagle Creek fire. It was 3 times the average volume of calls, is what I've been told. Is that about right? Yeah. From people over the state. And our new director of ONI, Sukri, let us know that you handled the influx of calls with calm grace and expertise, and really made a difference to the people who were afraid and confused about what to do and where to go. So I'm proud of the work that you did and the level of professionalism you displayed on the behalf of the city. And I want to thank you and your team, David Muir, Jonah Wilbach, Teresa Solano, Lisa Letty, and Susan Barr, for everything you did during the emergency and for everything that you do that often goes unnoticed every other day of the year. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I have great staff, so that's the key.
Congratulations.
Any other questions from council on this one?
No,
Mayor?
but I'll second Commissioner Udaley's comment. Pending reading your letter, Tom, I will absolutely sign it. I think this is exactly the right direction that we should be taking, and I appreciate it.
Before John and Jane leave, I want to acknowledge that we are the beneficiaries of many people that have been working on this, like John, for a long time. And a couple of bureau directors that have now are working with us here, but have worked in other cities with 311 systems. So Director Treat at PBOT, Chief Myers at Fire, and they've been very helpful in talking with directors about what the pros of this are and how it could help everyone's work. So for me, it's a good example of finding all the folks out there that can walk us through the pros and cons, thinking about sequencing this appropriately so that it's not overwhelming for people and we have the probability of success. So that's the proposal that we'll end up bringing council.
Great.
Anything else? Thank you so much.
We know our next steps.
Thank you.
So now we're shifting from the forward-facing items on the list to the internal-facing items on the list. And Commissioner Udaley is very excited for this next phase. I want to do just brief intro. This goes back to my budget presentation in was it May? I think I was in May. In May, when I tried to knit together what I had heard from all the bureaus before the OMF presentation, which was a consistent story of the strains of growth on every bureau and what that means for the internal services in terms of being able to deliver for the city and the residents of Portland. We are focusing here on recruitment and procurement, and in the simple layperson's terms that I've been using, hiring people fast enough and buying stuff fast enough. And we are lucky to have people here who are coming up to give us the plans as they are shaping up to do that better so that all of your bureaus can serve the community more effectively. So first we're going to do recruitment, and I'm going to ask Cyril DeSummers McGee, our outstanding new Assistant HR Director, to come up and walk us through the plan.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Is this your first time in front of the city
Yes, it
council?
is.
Colleagues, we have a newbie.
A newbie.
Welcome, Cyrilda.
Thank you so much. For the record, my name is Cyrilda Summers McGee, and I'm the Assistant Director for the Bureau of Human Resources. I'm going to talk to you today about recruitment. So I've been working for the city for about 10 weeks now. I am counting. And when I first started, Anna and Tom, Anna, the Bureau Director for HR, sat me down and said, we have a charge for you. We want you to fix what's going on in recruitment. There are some challenges that we're plagued with right now, and we need to get them resolved as quickly as possible. And so I came up with a strategy to first understand what the problem is, because I was new. I actually hadn't had any problems with recruitment, and I needed to hear from a variety of stakeholders. So I met with some of our larger bureau directors, as well as operations managers inside some of the smaller bureaus. I met with the recruitment team to understand what their challenges were, and I also met with different stakeholders inside BHR. And I came up with a few trends that I'm going to share with you. One of the biggest things that's happening right now in the city of Portland is the city is expanding, our workforce is expanding, and there's a bottleneck that's happening in recruitment. There's a flood of requests coming through, and the recruiters are having a really challenging time keeping up with the demand. And the way that challenge is manifesting itself is in the following ways. So when I spoke with heads of bureaus and operations folks, they shared these concerns very consistently. It takes too long to fill vacancies. It takes too long to post an open position. The subject matter expert review takes too much time. So basically, there's a process where if you put a cap on the number of candidates in the application pool of 75 or fewer, we will review the candidates for minimum qualifications. If it's more than 75 candidates in the pool, the people inside the bureau will have to review the candidates themselves. And they were saying, well, we're trying to get diversity in the applicant queue. We're trying to ensure that everyone has a fair shot of applying for the positions. And so we want to keep it open for a set period of time and not restrict the applicant pool to the first people who get into the queue at 75. And so when they have to review the candidates themselves, it takes too long. They said it takes too long to get an eligibility list. The list of folks who are eligible for the position is generated through BHR. The 75 candidate limits the applicant pool. There's confusion between human resources and business partner roles. They felt that the Bureau of Human Resources was falling further and further behind in helping them fill the vacancies on their teams. There were people who felt that larger, wealthier bureaus got better customer service than the smaller bureaus did for a variety of reasons. And then they felt that there was just a lack of diversity in the queue, and people were very committed to building a more diverse workforce. So those were very consistent pieces of information that I secured, not only from external bureaus, but hiring managers inside the Bureau of Human Resources. There was an equal opportunity complaint fest. I'll just say that. And so I came up with an idea, once I met with the recruitment team, to understand the process for making a hire. How do they go about it? How do you do this business? I've been in recruiting for a very, very long time, and so I can understand what high-functioning recruitment looks like and less high-functioning recruitment looks like, and they share with me their process, and their process had some challenges. And so what's before you are the changes that I am committing that the Bureau of Human Resources will be able to employ fairly quickly. So right now, what you see before you is the current service level versus the future service level. And the list is longer than this, but these are the most interesting of the modifications that you can anticipate seeing. The time it takes to post a position. So I had never heard a time to post. I've heard about time to fill. I've heard about all other kinds of metrics, but time to post was new to me. So I asked the recruiters, I said, tell me about this concept about time to post. In my first week, hiring managers sent me 6 or 7 emails with the same auto-generated text that said, thank you so much for submitting your requisition, Commissioner Udaley. We will have that posted in 2 to 4 weeks. People were upset, and I can totally understand that. And so we will be posting and making sure there is no queue of positions to be posted within a 5-day window. So basically, Mayor Wheeler, if you submit a request to fill on your team, you wouldn't do that. But if you give somebody else the responsibility to get that done, and they send it to
I want people to believe that I would. though.
Right. You would, absolutely, if you had time. You give that to us on Wednesday. We will make sure that by Monday, everything that's received to us in our office by Wednesday is posted that following Monday. And we're already there. I mean, so that was one of the first kind of low-hanging fruits. Get rid of that email. People were so angry. Outreach. Right now, we do really passive advertising. We call it outreach, but it's not at all outreach. It's advertising. We will be engaging in outreach. That's going to require us to do recruitment a little differently. It's also going to require us to get some additional staffing, which is coming soon, coming forward to you all very soon. Just a couple extra bodies, but we're really going to get out there to promote the city differently than we have in the past, where there are actually bodies out there talking to people, selling them on the idea of coming to work for the city. And so that's a change. We will be conducting all of the minimum qualification reviews. So there will be, right now we have a cutoff of 75 applicants or less. If it's over 75 applicants, we do not review. We will review all candidate pools with no cap on the number, and that's going to happen over the next few months. We're utilizing new technologies to allow us to be more effective and efficient in doing this. So that's coming pretty soon. We are generating eligibility lists within 5 days. Right now, we're averaging 13 or more days to get you a list of candidates after your position is closed. And that's an additional 2 weeks before you can even start the process of screening for a candidate for your organization. We're going to get it down to 5 days or less. And then we'll continue to provide demographic snapshots, but we'll do it more proactively. So right now, we provide you with how diverse your applicant pool is in every phase of the recruitment and selection process. If you ask us, we will proactively provide that to you. We can't tell you that Jimmy's black and, Teresa's Caucasian, but what we can tell you is that 40% of the people that you are inviting to interviews are of color or are female or are veterans or disabled. We can provide that to you, and we can do that proactively instead of waiting for you to invite us. And then we're creating right now a rapid recruitment document. So, Commissioner Fish, when someone on your team sends us a request to fill, we will auto-generate to you, okay, this is the amount of time you said you would like your position to be posted. So that means in 3 weeks, you will have a list of people who are eligible to be pursued for hire. By this date, you should be conducting interviews. So why don't you go ahead and start getting your interview panel scheduled now, so that you're not waiting for 4 weeks before you start having the conversation about who is going to be a part of the interview process, and then have to wait for another 4 weeks for those people to be available. And now we're 2 months into the process, and you've already lost out on all of your ACE candidates, because people who are amazing candidates can go anywhere. Why do we want them to choose us? We can help facilitate that by expediting the process. So those are just a few of the things that we have in the hopper. And ultimately, that's going to lead to us changing our time to fill from we're averaging about 140 days from the time a position is posted to a time a person is actually on the scene and hired. We'll get it to under 100, which is a standard, industry standard, best practice number of days. I give you this number because 20 years from now, when you're talking to BHR, you can ask them, what's your time to fill right now, right? From a position, when a position is posted to a person is on scene and hired. That's a number that can always be generated for you. And that is a way for you to be able to determine if it is high functioning or if it is not high functioning. We can hit 100 days. All we need is a couple extra bodies, but we also have strong leadership. I hired Ashley Grundy, who is the manager of recruitment. she's right there in the green jacket. And we worked together at Kaiser Permanente, where we did some amazing work. I poached her from OHSU. She can do high volume recruitment. She's a strong leader, and she's been doing it for years. Although, you know, with that good melanin, you can't tell that right now, but she's been doing it for quite some time. So we're excited to get this work done for you, and I promise you, 6 months from now, ask, what's our time to fill average? It'll be 100 days.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, please.
Absolutely. I would feel disrespected if you didn't, Commissioner Fish.
Well, first of all, we're glad you're on our team, and that was quite a debut. So nice presentation, and very clear. And getting your arms around the timetable is really important. And in the utilities that I have the honor of leading, because of people aging out, because of changes in PERS, because of changes in the marketplace, we're seeing a lot of turnover.
Absolutely.
And so that's disruptive, but it is also a huge opportunity because both of my bureaus are deeply committed to equity and opportunity. So as we are replacing people that have given a lot of great service to the city, we have a chance to change the composition of our workforce.
Absolutely.
And I want to focus on that for a second because the timing part is crucial because we have positions that are, you know, very, these are important positions that can't stay vacant for a while without putting undue burdens on everyone else. You know, you said in your presentation that we don't do enough in terms of the outreach, and we do some sort of standard advertising and things. And I just want to make two suggestions, and I know there are already things you're working on. One is we're particularly interested in knowing what are those professional associations out there of you know, outstanding potential candidates of color in engineering, in all these services. Now, we get a flavor of this when conventions come to town. Leslie Goodlaw last year brought a convention of public sector professionals, and a number of us got to go to it and meet folks. Well, it was like, you know, I mean, I think everyone had the same impression, which is how can we shut down the airport? Can we take the 24-hour window here to make some offers? Because it was a lot of talent, and that talent is also being recruited nationally. But so how do we get into those professional associations, note boards, and other things? Because I agree with you, unless the pool is big and you're talking to the right people, it's just not enough to put ads in a few newspapers and hope the word gets out. And the second thing I want to observe is that, and I want to just observe how the mayor landed in his recent recruitment, very important, actually hugely important recruitment for the city, which is the new police chief. He ended up selecting an outstanding candidate who happened to be number 2 in a sister city. My sense is that there is a real opportunity out there if we're looking at who's number 2 and number 3 in high-performing organizations. Because what do we know about numbers 2 and 3? We know that they may be for a period of time blocked in getting to number 1. And we know they're hungry. And we know they are people ready to make their reputation somewhere as the number 1. So how do we identify all that talent? I mean, we're doing that now at the city level. You know, we've created a number of deputy director positions precisely to build our farm team with the idea that you could take almost any deputy, and in the future, they would be a qualified candidate for a director position because they're since being groomed. So I felt like we haven't done as well as we could sort of identifying who are all those number 2s that are getting a lot of grooming for leadership, but maybe getting impatient with waiting their turn, where when we come to them and say, we want you to be top of the food chain, the new police chief the mayor hired is, I believe, in her early 40s. So it's just a fantastic situation. How do we reach those people?
Absolutely.
And then how do we compete?
Well, you know, what you're talking about is poaching, and
Coaching?
absolutely.
Wait a second. Are we going to be fined by the NFL for this?
You might.
Or NBA?
You know, absolutely not. But the best recruiters in the industry, we poach all day long, right? I go to look and actively evaluate who the number 2s are and what are they high quality or aren't they high quality. That's the difference between passive recruitment and active recruitment.
Okay.
Right now the city of Portland engages in passive recruitment. industries that I've come from or helped with their poaching expeditions, they don't have the luxury of hoping that the great talent's going to find them. They find the great talent, and they seek them out, and they say, you should choose us.
And they fly them in.
They fly, absolutely. We can fly people in. We got some money. People got money. I know this for a fact, right? We just choose not to go and pursue really high quality candidates in that way. We will be engaging in those pursuits, especially for hard to fill positions, especially when it comes to the engineering deficit that we have right now. We have a great deal of vacancies and we need to fill those. So we're coming up with pilot programs to do very targeted engagement with underrepresented communities to get them to become interested in and pursue positions within the city of Portland. Those things are happening.
Music to my ears. And we really look forward to working with you towards that end.
I'm excited to hear you say that.
Thank you.
Could I just add a couple of comments? Commissioner Fish mentioned the police chief recruitment. We started going through the standard channels. And there are a number of organizations that we RFP'd to help us with that recruitment. And it became very obvious during that process that those organizations in and of themselves, while they're well-connected, they were also passive
Right.
in their recruitment strategies. And so we shifted gears. We did it internally with the resources we had. But what I think made a difference for that particular recruitment, and don't get me wrong, we had a number of very highly qualified candidates. We're really excited about Chief Outlaw coming in, but there were other very good candidates. All of those candidates were personally recruited into the process. In other words, people had to pull connections, they had to call people, they had to, let them know it was a real recruitment, because let's be honest, in government, a lot of the recruiting isn't real, and people know that. And they know there is a preferred internal candidate. You can smell the stink of that 100 miles away. And so it really helps to pick up the phone and let people know this is a real recruitment. Number two, advocates in the organization who already have relationships, whether it's through a professional organization or a contact or a prior experience somewhere else. Those are invaluable in terms of helping to encourage people to apply. And I agree with you, Cyrilda, you have to go on offense. I appreciate your using the word poaching, because that's exactly what it is. If you want top talent, everybody wants top talent right now.
Everyone.
And top talent expects to be recruited aggressively. And if you're passive in the recruitment, it says something about the organization to which you are trying to get them to join. They don't want to join a passive organization. People want to be with winners. They want to be with the offense. They don't want to be on the defense. So I like your attitude
Exactly right.
in terms of how you're approaching this. Now I have a question, because I just really didn't understand it, and I'll confess, and you'll come to find I'm not half as smart as I look. The minimum qualifications screen. So our current policy is we only do that if there are less than 75 people who apply. Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly?
No.
Could you explain that to
Right.
me again, please?
So the way the process works is we can screen, BHR can screen for minimum qualifications, meaning if we say that you need to have 3 years experience in the job, a bachelor's degree, and be certified in phlebotomy, I don't know, I'm making things up. If we say that those are the requirements for the position, we need to screen for that, right? If it's 75 applicants or less, and this is something you have to predetermine when you submit your requisition. Do you want us to do the screening and cap it at 75? Or would you like to do your own screening and leave it open?
I see.
Right? So if
Okay.
BHR screens, it's actually, it takes the burden off of you from going through people who are not at all qualified for the job. If you say, no, I want to get a broad applicant pool, let's leave it open, I may get 300 candidates, you'll be doing the screening and to determine who meets the minimum qualifications to begin with.
Very good. And could I ask a follow-up question? You made reference, I believe, to technology.
Yes.
Could you explain that?
Yes, so we have the NeoGov system, and right now, BHR has historically used about, 15% of its capability. So we are going to be exploring all of those little buttons in there that allow you to activate different features and functions of the NeoGov system that will allow us to automate things that we have been doing manually and that is arguably adding between 25 and 50 days to the selection process. So, number one, let's just use what we currently have. We're also going to be interfacing our NeoGov system, and we're about 90% there, with the SAP system, so that when you send incomplete requisition to BHR, it will automatically say, we don't have the information that you need, right? Versus you send it to us, then we call you, leave you a voice message. You return that call within 1 to 2 weeks. We then tell you we don't have this information. It takes an additional week to 2 weeks to get the information from you. And then after that point, we post it. That's adding to the time to fill, and it's ensuring that you're not getting the staffing levels you need to be successful in getting the job done. So all of those types of things are being worked on right now. We're partnering with BTS. We're partnering with the NeoGov system that we pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to maintain, and we're utilizing the resources differently.
Great, and I know you know this, but I'll just state it for the record. With all of these technologies, you know, in the screening process, we always have to be very objective and work very, very hard to make sure we're not using a screen that is fraught with implicit bias.
Absolutely.
And therefore, on the technologies, we need to be doubly certain that we're not scripting in some sort of an implicit bias. And I know that you're already a leader in undertaking those efforts, and you'll work to make sure that the process is well controlled in terms of who gets to establish the screens, and then reviewing those screens to make sure there is no implicit bias in those screens.
Thank you for putting that on the record. It is our most important research and education of our recruiters that we're engaging in right as we speak. Literally, we had a 2-hour training about implicit bias and how the system can support and encourage bias, and we will not be complicit in maintaining that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner. Eudy.
I just want to thank you for this overview. I feel like I've been, as the person who doesn't post the positions, a little in the dark about why it takes so long.
Right.
And it's especially a problem with BDS, which I think we have our own process on that side, which greatly expands this timeline past 140 days. And as you mentioned, by the time we decide we want to hire someone, they have often already found another job and perhaps left the city.
Absolutely.
So thank you. My question is about the demographic snapshot. So say we post for a position and we're just not happy with that snapshot.
Right.
Is there an opportunity, I mean, I suppose we can reopen, but then is there a chance to kind of refine the outreach so we have a greater chance of reaching the kind of diverse applicants we want to reach, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So right now, we are providing a snapshot after a position has closed.
Yeah.
We can provide that snapshot a week into it,
Oh,
and
cool.
2 weeks into it, and 3 weeks into it, right? And modify how we're advertising, modify how we're engaging the community, modify who is becoming interested in the role itself. That requires a level of proactivity that BHR, from a recruitment standpoint, hasn't engaged in, and neither have hiring managers. So with the rapid recruitment tool, we can start to plant a seed, and hopefully it'll germinate into something beautiful of letting folks know, here are the ways that we can engage with you. We don't want to overwhelm you, because people are also really busy, but we want to, if you're saying you're committed to diversity, if you say that you're committed to ensuring that you have a really diverse candidate pool of highly qualified candidates, we can provide you with more information, and that's a way that you can that's something you can opt into if you so choose.
Great.
So,
And then my other question is, I also have a particular interest and concern with hiring and retaining and providing meaningful opportunity to employees with disabilities.
Yes.
And my office has recently discovered some of the challenges within the city of including and supporting people with disabilities. So I guess I just want to flag that as a interest and concern, and we passed on those concerns and some possible solutions to Anna Canwit yesterday. But, you know, I have to admit, I haven't read the entire model employer plan, but I'm wondering how that will be will be, or if it will be integrated into our new recruitment plan?
Absolutely. So all underrepresented populations, thank you. I'm like, what
I know.
word to describe? All underrepresented populations are a target for us, right? And so that includes veterans because, you know, we've gotten in some trouble a long time in the past, and so we kind of provided some wraparound services to make sure they get the points that they are due. But we also need to establish a way to flag folks with disabilities to make sure that they're getting a fair shake at an opportunity inside the organization, and train against the biases that people have against folks with visible disabilities. Recruitment is targeting those populations. We will be going to events where they are located. We will have representatives where they can see that we are truly committed to them. We are taking a more proactive approach, not just with communities of color or women in the engineering sector, also veterans, also folks with disabilities. And it's a part of a holistic outreach, real outreach plan that we're engaging in. So yes, it is wrapped into the recruitment new model.
Great. And I think, you know, that has to begin with the list of physical requirements of the job, which is something I was surprised. You know, we just did a recruitment for, well, we just hired a new director at ONI, and while we were developing that job description, I discovered there's this whole list of physical abilities that are required, you know, of the person in order to fill the job. And I couldn't see the justification for a lot of them. So I just see an issue right out of the gate that we are perhaps limiting potential applicants unnecessarily. And then there's not consistent resources and support across all of the bureaus. So someone coming into one bureau with a disability may have a very different experience in the next bureau. And I think those are things that really need to be addressed citywide and not bureau by bureau, because it's a very particular area of expertise, and we can't assume that expertise lies within every bureau.
Can I make
Thank you.
just one comment about that? The Water Bureau is launching a pilot with the full help and assistance of the Office of Equity, the Disability Commission, and Office of Human Resources, and Ann has been very helpful, and it flows from a particular reference in the model employer report that we commission. And the idea is to do a pilot to figure out how we can be a model employer for people with intellectual disabilities. And we're modeling this after what Seattle did. And in Seattle, a prior mayor said it's a priority, so that got everyone's attention. And the program was a huge success. We went up and we observed it, and we learned some things, and we're working now with a nonprofit partner. And this is one piece of what you're talking about, Commissioner, because people have all kinds of barriers and disabilities that they have to overcome. But what we're going to do through the pilot is learn how can we become a welcoming place for someone with an intellectual disability. And it turns out some jobs need to be tweaked. There has to be some supervision. There are third-party nonprofits that have folks who come in and work side by side to help people be successful. And then at the back end, of course, what you're looking for is someone who is thriving in that setting and is eligible for a permanent position. And we hope through the course of the pilot to get a lot of information, and then when we begin to right-size it, the goal is to make this available citywide based on our experience.
Great. Thank you.
So before Cyrilda leaves, I just want to underscore how committed and how important this is. I saw Assistant PBOT Director Chris Warner back here, and it reminded me that that bureau has forecasted over 140 vacancies in the next year and a half. And that's just one of our bureaus. So enormous opportunity for the work and the leadership that Cyrilda and her team are bringing to shape the city for years to come. So we are committed to continuing to bring this to you in terms of resourcing it appropriately and making the changes that we need to make this happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Russ is coming up to talk to us about procurement. Our Chief Procurement Officer is on vacation, so we are lucky that Ken was not called to jury duty today, which he nearly was. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Tom. For the record, Ken Rust, the Chief Financial Officer for the City of Portland, and the Director of the Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services. I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that we have as a central service provider and a supporter of, for Bureau activities in the area of procurement. And the chart that I have in the handout gives you a little bit of a sense of what the volume level has been for procurement services over the last 4 years. And we've seen a really substantial increase in overall level of procurement activity in general, but very specifically with construction services associated with city projects. And we've seen an over 200% increase in total volume and probably about a 300% increase in construction services. And this is through 2016-17, and we see this actually getting worse. Worse in the sense that there's more volume coming. This doesn't take into account the GO bond program for housing. You know, we're just in the starting up of the GO bonds for parks. PBOT has more gas tax revenue. Water is engaging in some very large multi-year projects. And BES has talked about doubling their capital program. So that's the backdrop that we're working on. And you can see the line on this chart shows how many FTE are devoted to that activity in procurement services. And it's basically been flatlined over the last 4 years. So the challenge we have is how do we support this growing need to buy things, and buying things are things that Portlanders want. They want projects built, they want the services that those projects provide. How do we do that? So we've been doing a lot of work trying to figure the answer to that question. We think the answer is really twofold. We think part of it is our processes. We have to look at how we're doing our work and imagine ways that we can do that better and more efficiently. And one of the things that we brought to the council recently, and we thank you for your support, was looking at expanding the signature authority of the Chief Procurement Officer. So some of the things that routinely come to council and take time can be done with the pen of the Chief Procurement Officer with appropriate controls so that we know that we're spending the money correctly, but to expedite that procurement on relatively routine things. And we think that that will be very helpful. We have a lot of Bureau support for that. It's a pilot program, and we plan to bring the results back to you in another year or so. We also have been working on looking at how would we reinvent or look at ways in which the construction services program overall could be changed and improved and reduce that time frame. So that's been a bit of an effort. We've been reaching out to the Bureau of Environmental Services and can see where a typical intake process that takes maybe 34 weeks to get to a contract, maybe we could chop 10 weeks off of that. So that's very helpful as well. But even with those efforts, we think it is a resource issue, and we really do need more resources. And in fact, the council, as part of the adopted budget for this fiscal year, has a budget note that directs OMF to look at what the resource needs are and the funding plan is for services like procurement services, and to bring back a proposal for you to consider. And we've done a lot of work over the course of the summer looking at what those needs are. We have a proposal that we're bringing back in the fall bump that looks at adding 3 FTE to procurement services in the area of professional technical expert services contracting, which is really a lot of the front end work to construction services, and then being able to add capacity on the construction services side as well. So those are some of the things that we've been looking at, re-engineering, but also adding resources to improve performance. And I think going forward, we recognize that while we may be leading the effort, we really need to engage our customer bureaus as well that we serve. And that's really predominantly the big infrastructure bureaus like environmental services, water, PBOT, and parks. And we have to define what success looks like. And success, obviously, reduce the time it takes to get a construction services contract ready to proceed. But we need to make sure that we do that in terms of satisfying some of our other goals as well. And that is, how do we make sure that in our rush to make sure projects get done more quickly, that we aren't shortcutting our important goals in social equity contracting, and make sure that those underrepresented communities that are striving to have an opportunity to work with the city aren't precluded because we've decided that speed trumps equity, but that's not a satisfactory outcome as well. So those are some of the concepts that we're working on, some of the needs and challenges that we're facing. We have a bit of a roadmap about where we're going to go. A key part of that is to recruit and retain and select a very qualified chief procurement officer to take Christine Moody's place. That process is in the works, but that's a lot of the work that we'll be engaging with bureaus on over the course of the next few months.
Just had a kind of a generic question, and you're right, the utilities have a ton of stuff in the pipeline. In fact, I think the utilities are partly responsible for the ramping up in FTEs because we've made a conscious decision to invest in our system and to do it in a cost-effective way, which means having people on staff who provide guidance and not contracting that out. But I guess just philosophically, from your perspective, is a $3 million contract that procurement has to scrub from soup to nuts qualitatively different than a $25 million contract, all things being equal?
Difficult question to answer, Commissioner, because sometimes smaller isn't necessarily easier to do. They can be very complex, a small contract. Sometimes a very large contract, if it's well-developed and depending on the nature of the contracting effort, is a relatively straightforward process. So it's very difficult to generalize. I think the key thing is how much work bureaus have done at the outset to make sure that when it enters into the contracting process, that it's really ready to go. And I think if we can be engaged early working with bureaus, we can help identify what some of those challenges might be to make sure that even if it's small and complicated or large and complicated, that it moves at the appropriate pace to get it to fruition.
Well, I think what you just said is a good reminder that we should not be lulled into just assuming that the dollar amount of the contract determines its complexity. Because some of those $3 to $5 million contracts, particularly where there's a specialty service, require extra effort to hit our opportunity goals and sometimes other complications. That whereas some of the bigger construction projects where you get a GC in and they've had some experience working with the city, some of that is more familiar. So good. It's good to know that we should not just assume that dollar amount drives a level of complexity and staff time required to get the job done.
Any other questions? Great, thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
So at the outset of this work session, the mayor walked through that the city of Portland, without a city manager, council form of government, struggles with some of these major projects. I want to come back to that. Because what I said, one of our team's goals for this work session today is to hear right track, wrong track, suggestions for improvement, engage some actions going forward. But really underlying all this is we need your clear direction on, is this evolution that you want to see? I am strongly recommending it. I believe it's necessary part of our evolution, and it'll pay off in spades if we invest in it and we work our way through consistent evaluation to a really good process, knowing that we won't do it perfectly the first year. But what we are really asking you fundamentally is, can we get to a place here where you, as the council, are directing your bureaus to be full-fledged participants in a project management discipline each year that signs off on projects, and should we go forward?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless, I can't imagine anybody making a case for increasing silos and decreasing efficiency. So the opposite is true, but you are also asking, just to be clear, commissioners to cede some of the authority they naturally have in this form of government in order to make the enterprise work smarter, better, more effectively in these large projects. So I'm fundamentally supportive of this effort.
I'm going to start finding my colleagues every time they use the word silo, because I think it's a term that gets overused. I'm being playful here, Mayor, but the truth is that there's a lot of examples of cross-bureau collaboration. Historically, the Bureau of Environmental Services and Parks have worked very well together because they have a kind of an overlapping mission. in the last couple of years, PBOT and BES have started to work much more effectively in terms of how they manage capital constructions and timing and things like that. And the lessons I've learned is it's about communication and it's about leadership. So for me, for this to be successful, Tom, and you're right, we don't have a city manager, although if at some point we see on the agenda that you're putting in for a salary adjustment, we'll know that.
Don't worry.
But what I have learned under this mayor is that we can get to consensus. And so it starts with putting down a marker, having these conversations, and just saying to the colleagues, can the five of us agree on a direction? And we have shown time and time again we can do that. I think this is an area where it's very important to reduce it to writing. That's what reasons I love the declaration of cooperation model. It's not done because people are suspicious of one another. It's done because there's a document you can turn to, and it says what everyone is committed to, and it has sort of a cheat sheet that Carmen would normally put together, which is, you know, who you contact.
Right.
And I think you have every right to expect that each bureau designates the tiebreaker. You know, and for my bureaus, it might even be the deputy. If you get to that fork in the road, you call the deputy, and the deputy is empowered to say yes or no and just make the decision. And the final is, I think we do our best work after we've done some pilots and we've gotten comfortable with it. And so, you know, I pick a couple high-profile projects, walk us through it, show us the benefits, both internally and, most importantly, show us how the public is benefited through a more efficient program, better use of resources, quicker. And I think that becomes the standard once people realize that it actually is a clear improvement, and you've got buy-in by leadership. But I think getting all 5 members of the council to sign a declaration of cooperation is very important.
At the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that we were not creating a project management office, but is that something we might do in the future?
To be determined. After I did the research that I alluded to, that the mayor asked me to do, what became very clear to me is I do not know yet enough about the informal and formal cultures that exist at the city to say that that's specific professional designation and that approach is required. We may get to a point where we do want to have a specific skill set and training in this model. But I'm very clear that this will get us part of the way and we'll learn a lot. And when we come back in front of you next year to evaluate and look at a potential list of projects that you want to direct us on for the next year or coming years, we'll have to revisit the makeup of the team, decision-making. I'm not clear enough yet on if we are like those other entities that I mentioned enough to be a PMO. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
What I'm hearing very clearly is the declaration of cooperation or letter of agreement is actually stronger and more effective for you and your teams than the resolution that we were envisioning. Is that right? Should the team and I work on actually putting it all in writing around decision-making, role clarity, timeline, and the expectations the council and their staffs would be clear that you could sign on to? Is that a fair assessment of what I'm hearing?
I would say that is a fair assessment of what you're hearing, but with the obvious admonition that you'll need to reach out to Commissioner Saltzman and
Excellent.
Commissioner Fritz and say they were unable to be here today.
Yes, I should have mentioned how
They may
interested.
have additional feedback that has not been presented today that would be useful.
I should have mentioned how helpful and effective the leadership of Commissioner Fritz and her staff have been on the consolidated customer service. They've been really pushing and doing a great job getting us to understand that.
I do have a particular interest in the permitting piece for obvious reasons. And, you know, one of my big concerns, Director Esau brought up, which is for everyone but BDS, permitting is a really small part of what their charge is. And those sections tend to be very understaffed. And
Right.
those permitting staff are really handling an inhuman work level right now. So that's definitely something I want to slip in that declaration of cooperation.
Jamie and I are both writing it down. so-
Yeah, I mean, and because I am relatively new here, I don't really understand, I mean, we have a real lack of nimbleness in hiring and budgeting, and I don't know if that's just the nature of the beast. It's a huge machine with lots of moving parts. Maybe there's frustration around the recruitment and hiring process. Maybe it's a reluctance to, well, it's not overstaffing, but adequately staff in the event of a downturn. I don't know what it is, but it's creating, like I said, just an unreasonable workload, lots of frustrations with the public, and really kind of gumming up the process.
Okay. Any colleagues that were up here want to come up and revisit something that I missed in the closing or that we did not revisit from earlier sections? Any other experienced, wise city leaders out there that would like to come up and chime in here? I see Chief of Staff Henderson, I see Susan, I see Andrew, I see a lot of talent in the room. Anybody want to add anything? Okay, well,
Grace, you don't want to come up here and, you sure? All right.
Nice job. Thank you, Tom.
thank you. I just want to
Thanks, Tom.
thank council and staffs and bureau leadership and staffs for engaging in this. This is a significant change, and we're committed to making it work. Thank you.
Good job.
Oh, it was fun.
Fun.
Thanks, Rebecca.
So I'm researching two questions. I'm researching, double checking.
Okay.
Double checking that under the new rules, that's not just what you have, that you will have two people you can nominate mayors. So, okay, that
I'd be thrilled to nominate him if he hasn't. Great. Yeah, I would. Okay. Okay, and I'll get you $5 in the jar for the sideways comment. I shouldn't have said.